The crystal wine glass froze halfway to my lips as Patricia Blackwell's words hung in the air like poison. "Let's address the elephant in the room," she announced, her voice dripping with false concern. After 6 years of marriage, it seems Nora is unable to fulfill that most basic duty of a wife. My cheeks burned as every pair of eyes at the Thanksgiving table turned to me. 6 years of her subtle digs about my barren state had culminated in this public humiliation disguised as concern. My husband Drew squeezed my hand under the table, his silent apology for what his mother had just done. "Perhaps it's time Drew considered his options," Patricia continued, swirling her expensive Merlot. "There are procedures, surrogates, or other arrangements to ensure the Blackwell name continues through our firstborn son." The implication was crystal clear. Divorce me, find someone fertile, someone worthy of the Blackwell name. Have you ever had your deepest wound exposed in front of the people you desperately wanted to accept you? That feeling of being stripped naked, your most private pain turned into dinner conversation? When someone uses your vulnerability as a weapon against you, how do you respond? Do you crumble under their cruelty, or do you find strength in places you never knew existed? What Patricia didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been carrying a secret for 14 weeks. A secret that would shatter the Blackwell family forever. I placed my napkin on the table and stood slowly, reaching for my purse. With deliberate calm, I removed a small envelope I'd been carrying for 3 weeks and slid it across the table toward her. "What's this?" Patricia asked, cautiously picking it up as if it might contain something dangerous. "Open it," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Would you like to know what happened when Patricia opened that envelope and discovered my impossible pregnancy? And why I told her she was right that I wouldn't be giving them grandchildren despite the ultrasound in her hands? If this story resonates with you, hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this unfolds. I met Drew Blackwell during my junior year at Northwestern. I was an art history major on a full scholarship, working 3 jobs to cover expenses. He was finishing his MBA, heir to a banking dynasty that had its name on buildings across Boston. On paper, we were a mismatch. The scholarship girl from small-town Wisconsin and the golden boy with the trust fund. But chemistry doesn't care about bank accounts. "You're the first person who's ever looked at me and actually seen me," Drew told me on our 3rd date, as we wandered through the Art Institute after hours. His father's donation had gotten us private access, but Drew seemed almost embarrassed by the privilege. We were married 2 years after graduation, a lavish affair at the Blackwell estate in Vermont that made me feel like I was starring in someone else's life. Patricia, Drew's mother, greeted me with air kisses and a thin smile that never reached her eyes. "Welcome to the family," she said, her voice cool and practiced. "I'm sure you'll adjust." I didn't understand the warning beneath those words until later. The first 2 years were blissful. We settled in Boston, close enough to the Blackwells for monthly visits, but far enough to build our own life. Drew joined the family investment firm while I secured a position at the Museum of Fine Arts, eventually becoming an assistant curator specializing in American Impressionism. Children weren't an immediate priority. We wanted to travel, establish our careers, enjoy being young and in love. But at every family gathering, Patricia would find ways to mention it. "Elizabeth's daughter just had twins," she'd say, referring to some distant family friend. Their 3rd set. "Some women are just naturally maternal, I suppose." Or, "The Morgan's son and his wife are expecting again. 5 years younger than you, and already giving his parents 3 grandchildren." Drew would squeeze my hand under the table, a silent apology for his mother's comments. "She'll back off once we have kids," he'd assure me later. After a year of not preventing pregnancy, nothing happened. Another year passed, and still nothing. We started tracking my cycles, timing intimacy like it was a military operation. Sex became mechanical, purposeful rather than passionate. The specialist we saw gave us the most frustrating diagnosis possible: unexplained infertility. Nothing conclusively wrong with either of us, just some cosmic incompatibility we couldn't identify or fix. "It happens sometimes," the doctor said kindly. 20% of couples have no clear medical reason for their fertility challenges. We moved on to treatments, hormones, procedures, appointments that consumed our calendar and our conversations. I gave myself injections in bathroom stalls at work, carried medication that needed refrigeration to dinner parties, and planned vacations around my cycle. The first miscarriage came after our first round of IVF. 8 weeks of cautious joy ended with cramping and blood during a museum board meeting. I excused myself, drove home in a daze, and called Drew from the bathroom floor. He came home immediately, held me through the night as I sobbed, mourning a child we'd barely begun to know. Patricia sent a book on nutrition for fertility, with passages about processed foods highlighted in yellow. No card, no call, just a silent judgment on what I must have done wrong. The second miscarriage happened 6 months later, and the third almost exactly a year after that. Each loss hollowed me out a little more, scraping away at my sense of self, my identity as a woman, as a wife. Drew held me through each loss, wiped my tears, promised we'd keep trying. But I saw the light in his eyes dim each time, watched him retreat further into his work after each disappointment. Our conversations, once ranging across art and philosophy, politics and dreams, narrowed to medications, doctor's appointments, and temperatures. By our 5th anniversary, we were ghosts haunting the same beautiful brownstone. Drew started working later, taking more business trips. I threw myself into a prestigious traveling exhibition that kept me busy and distracted. "Are you two trying again?" Patricia would ask at every family dinner, her eyes scanning my body for signs of pregnancy, her tone suggesting my childlessness was a personal failure rather than a medical reality. I started dreading family gatherings. Started making excuses to miss them. Started wondering if Drew married the wrong woman, if with someone else, someone more fertile, he'd already have the family he deserved. The treatments had drained our emotions and our bank accounts. Drew never complained about the money. The Blackwell fortune could withstand far greater expenditures, but the emotional toll was becoming unbearable. I could feel him pulling away, one late night at the office at a time. If Patricia's comments made me feel like a failure as a woman, the growing distance between Drew and me made me feel like a failure as a wife. The two identities I'd built my life around were crumbling, and I didn't know who I was without them. Have you ever felt your entire worth being reduced to a single ability your body simply wouldn't cooperate with? Like all your achievements, your love, your character counted for nothing against the one thing you couldn't do? The pressure from the Blackwells was relentless, but nothing compared to the pressure I put on myself. Each month that passed without a positive test felt like another personal failure. Another reason for Drew to regret choosing me. Another victory for Patricia and her thinly veiled disapproval. If you've ever had your value questioned because of something beyond your control, give this video a thumbs up. Your worth isn't determined by what your body can or cannot do. Then came the Milan conference. The museum sent me to Italy to negotiate loans for our upcoming exhibition on women impressionists. I spent a week immersed in art, history, and for the first time in years, a sense of purpose disconnected from my fertility. In Milan, nobody looked at me with pity or expectation. Nobody knew about my empty womb or my failing marriage. I was just Nora, the curator from Boston, competent and professional. In the evenings, I dined alone in small cafes, savoring wines I denied myself during years of treatment cycles. I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to make choices based solely on desire rather than medical advice. On my last night in Milan, I met James Harlow. He was an American art collector attending the same conference, seated at the bar of my hotel when I returned from dinner. He recognized me from a panel discussion earlier that day and offered to buy me a drink. James was charismatic, knowledgeable, and refreshingly direct. Our conversation flowed from Monet to modern installations, from Renaissance techniques to museum politics. Not once did he ask if I had children, that innocent question that had become a dagger to my heart. "You're married," he observed hours later as we lingered over digestives, nodding toward my ring. 6 years, I confirmed, twisting the platinum band around my finger. James nodded thoughtfully. "And yet you're dining alone in Milan on a Friday night." "Work trip," I explained, though the words felt hollow even to my ears. Of course, he said, not pressing further. Would you like to see the private collection at my hotel? I have a cassette sketch you might find interesting for your exhibition. I knew what he was really asking. I knew what would happen if I said yes. I knew what it would cost me, what I would become. I said yes anyway. His hotel room did have art, an impressive collection of sketches displayed in museum-quality frames. But we both knew I hadn't come for the cassette. That night, in a luxury hotel overlooking the Duomo, I betrayed my marriage vows. With James, I wasn't a defective incubator or a disappointment. I was desired, whole enough. For the first time in years, my body felt like a source of pleasure rather than failure. I told myself it was just physical, just this once, just an escape. I told myself what happened in Milan would stay in Milan. But 2 weeks later, James called. He was in Boston for business. Would I meet him? The affair lasted 3 months. James traveled to Boston frequently, always with legitimate art business as his cover. We met in hotel rooms, at private gallery viewings, once in my office after hours. Each encounter was a rebellion against the life that had become a prison of disappointment and failure. I told myself Drew was distant anyway, probably having his own affair. I told myself we were practically separated already, just sharing a house rather than a life. I told myself a lot of things to justify betraying the man I'd promised to love forever. Then James ended it with a text message. Can't do this anymore. Sorry. No explanation. No goodbye. Just digital abandonment that left me reeling, forcing me to confront the wreckage I'd made of my integrity. The shame was overwhelming. James had been an escape, but in running away from my problems, I'd created far worse ones. I recommitted to my marriage, determined to repair what I'd broken, even if Drew never knew about my transgression. I initiated date nights, weekend getaways, conversations about anything other than fertility and family planning. 2 weeks after James disappeared, Drew suggested we take a break from fertility treatments. I can't watch you go through this anymore, he said, holding my hands across our kitchen island. Let's just live our lives for a while. Travel. Focus on us. The relief was immense. For the first time in years, sex wasn't scheduled around ovulation or hormone injections. We took weekend trips to Maine, to New York, rediscovering the couple we'd been before infertility consumed us. Drew came home earlier from work. I stopped bringing exhibitions home with me. We were healing together. Then I missed my period. The first test was negative. So was the second. But the nausea persisted, and my breasts felt tender in a way I remembered from pregnancies past. The third test, taken a week later, showed a faint second line that made my heart stop. A blood test at my doctor's office confirmed it. I was pregnant. 8 weeks along already, conceived roughly 3 weeks after James had ended things. The timing made my blood run cold. This couldn't be Drew's baby. It couldn't be. DNA doesn't lie, and the timing was unmistakable. The last time James and I had been together was exactly when this child would have been conceived. Drew and I had been using protection during that period, still taking our break from actively trying. The miracle baby growing inside me belonged to a man who had discarded me with a text message. For days, I walked around in a daze, torn between joy at the life growing inside me and terror at what it would reveal. I considered terminating the pregnancy, erasing my mistake before anyone could discover it. I scheduled the appointment twice, canceled it twice. Despite everything, the betrayal, the fear, the shame, I couldn't bring myself to end this pregnancy. After years of loss, of emptiness, my body was finally doing what it was meant to do. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. Years of trying with the man I loved had produced nothing but heartbreak. 3 months with a man who meant nothing had created life. I resolved to tell Drew the truth. He deserved that much. But every time I tried, the words caught in my throat. How do you tell the man who has stood by you through years of heartbreak that you're pregnant with another man's child? How do you admit that his mother was right about you all along, that you weren't worthy of the Blackwell name? So I waited, telling myself I needed to be sure the pregnancy would last past the first trimester, past the point where my previous pregnancies had failed. Each day that passed without bleeding or cramping felt like both a blessing and a tightening noose. At 12 weeks, the ultrasound showed a healthy fetus with a strong heartbeat. I sobbed on the examination table, joy and despair tangled so completely I couldn't separate them. "Would you like to know the sex?" the technician asked, smiling at what she assumed were tears of happiness. "Yes," I whispered. "It's a boy. A son." A son who would bear no resemblance to the Blackwell men, whose arrival would expose my betrayal in the most public and undeniable way possible. Still, I waited, the ultrasound picture burning a hole in my purse as weeks passed. I told myself I was protecting Drew, sparing him pain for as long as possible. But the truth was simpler and more cowardly. I was protecting myself. Then came the annual Blackwell Thanksgiving and Patricia's toast that would change everything. Have you ever carried a secret so devastating that revealing it would destroy everything you hold dear? Drop a comment below if you've ever had to choose between a painful truth and a comfortable lie. The Blackwell family estate loomed against the November sky as Drew and I pulled up the long driveway. Old money Vermont, stone walls, manicured gardens, and a house that had witnessed 5 generations of Blackwell successes and secrets. I'd once found it intimidating. Now it felt like a stage for my impending doom. "You okay?" Drew asked, reaching for my hand. We'd been better these past weeks, closer, happier. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. Just the usual pre-Patricia anxiety, I lied, my free hand instinctively moving to my stomach. 14 weeks along, but still not showing enough to notice under my carefully chosen dress. Drew smiled sympathetically. "Just a few hours. We'll get through it together." If only he knew. The dining room of the Blackwell estate could seat 20, though today we were only 8. Patricia and Robert Blackwell, Drew and me, Drew's brother Ben and his pregnant wife Caitlin, 5 months along and glowing, Drew's sister Melody and her husband James. Not my James, thank God. Patricia greeted me with her usual air kisses, her eyes performing their reflexive sweep of my midsection before darting to Caitlin's obvious bump. "Nora, darling, you look well-rested." Translation: not pregnant. Cocktails in the sitting room were an exercise in survival. Caitlin dominated the conversation with nursery plans and ultrasound stories. Patricia hung on every word, while occasionally glancing at me with what could only be described as pity. "We're thinking of naming him Robert, after Grandpa," Caitlin announced, patting her belly. "The first of the next generation of Blackwell men." Patricia beamed. "Perfect. Family names are so important for continuing legacies." By the time we moved to dinner, I'd already consumed 2 glasses of sparkling water that everyone assumed was champagne. My stomach churned with morning sickness and anxiety as we took our seats around the massive mahogany table. The meal progressed with the practiced rhythm of old money: soup, salad, palate cleanser, main course. Conversations ebbed and flowed around me. Work talk, local gossip, politics briefly before Robert steered us to safer ground. I pushed food around my plate, taking small bites when someone looked my way. Then came dessert, pumpkin pie with homemade whipped cream. And Patricia reached for her wine glass. The crystal wine glass felt cold against my lips as I watched Patricia tap her dessert spoon against her own glass. The sound rang through the dining room like a death knell, silencing the polite murmurs of conversation. Drew squeezed my hand under the table, his silent apology for whatever was coming. "I'd like to make a toast," Patricia announced, her voice carrying that particular cadence of someone who's had exactly 2.5 glasses of expensive Merlot. Just enough to loosen her inhibitions, but not enough to slur her carefully enunciated words. "To family," Patricia began, her smile not quite reaching her eyes as they swept across the table, lingering fractionally longer on Caitlin's protruding belly. "And to new beginnings." Drew's hand tightened around mine. He knew what was coming as well as I did. As we gather for another Thanksgiving, I'm reminded how blessed we are. Patricia continued, her gaze now pointedly avoiding me. "Next year, we'll have a new little Blackwell at the table, thanks to Ben and Caitlin." Polite applause rippled around the table. Caitlin beamed while cradling her stomach. "The Blackwell family has always been about legacy," Patricia went on. about passing down our values, our traditions, our name to the next generation. I took a long sip of water, feeling the familiar knot forming in my stomach. Which is why, she continued, her voice taking on a theatrical quality of feigned concern, I think it's time we address the elephant in the room. The air seemed to vanish from my lungs. Drew is our oldest. He should have been the first to give us grandchildren. She turned her gaze directly to me now, her smile a thin veneer over decades of disappointment. But after 6 years of marriage, it seems Nora is unable to fulfill that most basic duty of a wife. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt my cheeks burn as every pair of eyes at the table turned toward me. Drew's father, Robert, stared intently at his plate. Ben looked uncomfortable. Caitlin nervously stroked her belly as if to protect her unborn child from the awkwardness. Only Melody showed open disapproval. Mother, Drew started, his voice tight with anger. This is completely inappropriate. Patricia cut him off with a wave of her hand. I'm only saying what everyone's thinking, darling. We've all watched you and Nora try for years. The specialists, the treatments, the disappointments. We've all pretended not to notice, to be polite. But perhaps it's time to accept reality. She turned to address the table again, raising her glass higher. To accepting God's plan. Some women are simply not meant to be mothers. And while that's unfortunate for our family line, we must adapt. I felt rather than saw Drew half rise from his chair, but I placed my hand on his arm, keeping him seated. 6 years of these jabs had taught me something. Patricia Blackwell would only escalate if challenged directly. Perhaps, Patricia continued, her voice dripping with false compassion, it's time Drew considered his options. There are procedures, surrogates, or other arrangements that could be made to ensure the Blackwell name continues through our firstborn son. Other arrangements? Drew echoed, his voice dangerous now. What exactly are you suggesting, Mother? Patricia took another sip of wine, her eyes never leaving mine. Only that there are solutions for couples in your situation. Drew deserves children. The family deserves heirs. Sometimes difficult choices must be made. My fork clattered against my plate as I set it down with trembling fingers. The words she wouldn't say hung in the air. Divorce her. Find someone fertile. Someone worthy of the Blackwell name. This was the moment. The crossroads I'd been avoiding for weeks. I could continue the charade, endure this humiliation like all the others before it. Or I could reveal the truth and bring everything crashing down around us. I placed my napkin on the table and stood up slowly. The room quieted, all eyes following me as I reached for my purse hanging on the back of my chair. Nora, Drew whispered, concern etched across his face. Don't let her. It's okay, I said quietly, though nothing was okay. Nothing had been okay for months. With deliberate calmness, I opened my purse and removed the small envelope that I'd been carrying for 3 weeks. This wasn't how I'd planned it, but plans had a way of disintegrating in the Blackwell household. You're right about one thing, Patricia, I said, my voice surprisingly steady as I placed the envelope beside my half-eaten pumpkin pie. There is an elephant in the room. I slid the envelope across the table toward her. What's this? She asked, not moving to take it. Open it. Patricia glanced at Robert, then at Drew, before cautiously picking up the envelope as if it might contain something dangerous. With manicured fingers, she extracted the card inside. Her expression shifted from smug superiority to confusion as she examined the grainy black and white image. I don't understand, she said, though the dawning realization in her eyes suggested otherwise. It's an ultrasound, I stated flatly. I'm 14 weeks pregnant. The silence that followed was absolute. Drew's sharp intake of breath beside me was the only sound as Patricia's face cycled through shock, disbelief, and something darker I couldn't name. That's impossible, she finally stammered. After all this time, after all the specialists said. Life finds a way, I cut her off, the words bitter on my tongue. Though I guess you were right about one thing. I won't be giving you grandchildren. Patricia's eyebrows shot up. What do you mean? I turned to Drew, seeing the confusion and hurt in his eyes. This wasn't how I wanted him to find out either, but Patricia had forced my hand. The baby isn't Drew's. The dining room erupted in chaos. Drew's face strained of color as he processed my words, trying to reconcile the impossible pregnancy with my devastating admission. What do you mean, it's not Drew's? Patricia demanded, her voice rising an octave. Whose is it then? Does it matter? I asked, suddenly exhausted. You were right all along, Patricia. I'm not worthy of your son or your family name. Drew stood up so abruptly his chair toppled backward. Nora, what are you saying? How is this? How could you? The hurt and confusion in his eyes broke something inside me. This man had loved me through everything, through failures and losses that would have driven many husbands away. And this was how I repaid him. I'm sorry, I whispered, inadequate words for an unforgivable betrayal. I never meant for this to happen. If you've ever had to deliver news that would shatter someone's world, hit that subscribe button. Sometimes the most painful moments reveal who we truly are. Who? Drew's voice was barely audible above the stunned silence. Who is he? I shook my head. It doesn't matter. The hell it doesn't. Drew slammed his fist on the table, making the crystal ware jump. You've been carrying another man's child for 3 months without telling me, and you say it doesn't matter who he is? Ben stood up, placing a hand on his brother's shoulder. Let's take this somewhere private, Drew. This isn't. No, Patricia interrupted, her voice ice cold. Let's hear it all now. Nora has clearly been waiting for an audience for her confession. The cruelty of her assessment wasn't entirely wrong. Part of me had wanted witnesses to prevent Drew from completely falling apart, to force all of us to maintain some semblance of dignity. But standing there under the weight of their collective judgment, I realized my mistake. There was no dignity to be found here, only shame and the wreckage of what had once been love. His name is James, I said quietly, looking only at Drew. He was in town for a conference. It was brief. It meant nothing. Nothing, Drew repeated, the word hanging between us. You destroyed our marriage for nothing. Our marriage was already broken, I said, the words escaping before I could stop them. You were gone, Drew. For months, you were physically present but emotionally absent. I was drowning in grief and failure, and you were nowhere to be found. Drew flinched as if I'd struck him. So this is my fault? I caused you to cheat because I was struggling too? Because I couldn't fix what was broken in both of us? No, I said quickly. That's not what I meant. The affair was my choice, my mistake. I'm just trying to explain. There's nothing to explain. Drew cut me off. You're pregnant with another man's child. After everything we've been through together, everything we've lost. His voice broke. How could you do this to us? I had no answer that could possibly suffice. The truth that I'd been lonely, desperate for validation, for the feeling of being whole rather than defective, seemed pathetically inadequate in the face of his pain. Patricia was the first to recover from the shock, her face settling into lines of grim satisfaction. Well, she said, dabbing her lips with her napkin. I suppose this explains everything. Your difficulty in conceiving was clearly a blessing in disguise. Imagine if you'd given Drew children only to have this moral failing emerge later. Mother, stop, Melody snapped, speaking for the first time since my revelation. This is between Drew and Nora. But Patricia was relentless, years of barely concealed contempt now flowing freely. I always knew there was something not quite right about you, Nora. A woman who can't fulfill her most basic purpose should at least compensate with loyalty. Drew whirled on his mother. Enough. You've said more than enough. The shock of Drew defending me, even now, silenced Patricia momentarily. But the damage was done. The truth was out, ugly and irrevocable. I gathered my coat and purse, unable to remain in that room a moment longer. I'll go to a hotel, I said quietly to Drew. We can talk tomorrow if you want. Or not. It's your choice. Drew didn't look at me, his gaze fixed on some middle distance. The baby, he said finally. Does the father know? I shook my head. No. He ended things before I knew. A bitter laugh escaped Drew. So you're alone in this. How convenient for him. There was nothing more to say. I walked out of the dining room, through the grand foyer with its ancestral portraits judging me from gilded frames, and out into the bitter November cold. No one followed me. No one called my name. In the rental car, I sat with my hands on the steering wheel, not yet turning the key. Through the window, I could see the lights of the Blackwell estate glowing against the darkening sky. Inside, a family was fracturing because of my actions. Drew was processing the ultimate betrayal. And somewhere beneath my ribs, a child who would never know his father was growing, oblivious to the destruction his existence had wrought. I placed my hand on my stomach, feeling nothing yet but knowing he was there. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though whether to the baby, to Drew, or to myself, I couldn't say. The next morning, Drew arrived at my hotel, his face haggard from a sleepless night. He sat across from me in the sterile hotel room, hands clasped between his knees. "I've been thinking all night," he began, his voice raw. "About us. About the baby." Hope flickered briefly in my chest, foolish, undeserved hope. "I can't do this," he continued. "I thought maybe I could. That I could raise another man's child, that I could forgive you. But I can't, Nora. I just can't." I nodded, having expected nothing less. "I understand." "Do you? Do you understand what you've done? It's not just the affair. It's the lies. The weeks of deception while you carried his child and said nothing. I was afraid," I admitted. "Afraid of losing you, of confirming everything your mother always thought about me." Drew laughed humorlessly. "Well, congratulations. You've managed both." The divorce proceedings began immediately. Drew was generous financially, more than I deserved, but immovable on his decision. I returned to Boston alone, to our empty apartment that would soon be just mine. Drew moved into a hotel, then a new condo across town. He filed paperwork to transfer to his firm's New York office. By Christmas, he was gone from Boston entirely. Patricia, freed from any pretense of accepting me, ensured that my name became mud in their social circles. Donations to the museum where I worked mysteriously dried up. Old friends, mostly Drew's friends, if I was honest, stopped returning my calls. I became a cautionary tale, the curator who couldn't have children until she cheated on her husband. I reached out to James once, thinking he had a right to know about the child. My email bounced back. His gallery said he'd moved to Europe. A Google search revealed he'd married an Italian heiress in a lavish ceremony on Lake Como. The wedding announcement mentioned they were expecting their first child in the spring, his second, though no one knew that but me. Alone at night in what had been our bedroom, I'd often talk to my growing belly. "It's just us now," I'd whisper, watching my stomach slowly expand week by week. "Just you and me against the world." Some nights, I'd dream Drew came back, that he forgave me, that we were a family despite everything. I'd wake up reaching for him, only to find cold sheets and the echo of my mistakes. The holidays passed in a blur of isolation. No Christmas with the Blackwells, no New Year's gala at the museum. Just me, alone with prenatal vitamins and a baby that kicked whenever I played Chopin. If you've ever had to face the consequences of a choice that changed everything, drop a comment below. Sometimes the hardest part isn't the moment of decision, but living with what comes after. As my pregnancy progressed, I withdrew from what remained of my social life. The whispers at the museum grew louder until they became impossible to ignore. I took a leave of absence when the director gently suggested it might be best for everyone. My parents, confused and disappointed but ultimately supportive, suggested I move back to Wisconsin until after the baby was born. A fresh start, my mother called it when she helped me pack up the Boston apartment, carefully avoiding any mention of Drew or how we'd ended up here. We both knew there was no starting fresh from what I'd done, but the fiction comforted us both. I found a small apartment in Madison, close enough to my parents for support, but far enough for independence. The winter was brutal that year, snow piling against my windows as I watched my body change, feeling the baby, my son, grow stronger each day. Alone in prenatal classes, I'd watch couples practice breathing techniques together, the fathers-to-be massaging their partners' backs, making plans for the delivery room. I practiced my breathing alone, used a pillow for back support, and tried not to think about the delivery room. 5 months after that devastating Thanksgiving, I gave birth to a healthy boy with James's dark hair and my green eyes. 10 hours of labor with my mother as my only support, her hand gripping mine through contractions, her worried eyes watching me push a grandchild into the world under circumstances neither of us had ever imagined. "Elliot," I whispered when they placed him on my chest, red and angry and perfect. I named him after my grandfather, giving him my surname since he would never know his father's. As I held him in the hospital room, counting his tiny fingers and toes, I felt the full weight of my choices. The nurse asked if I wanted to call the father with the news. I shook my head and asked her to take our first photo instead. Just Elliot and me, the family we were now. Drew sent a brief text after Elliot's birth. "I hope you're both well." I stared at those 6 words for an hour, composing and deleting responses until finally setting my phone aside without answering. What could I possibly say that would matter now? Motherhood was both harder and more beautiful than I'd imagined during all those years of trying. Elliot was colicky for the first 3 months, his crying jags lasting hours no matter what I did to soothe him. I walked the floors of my small apartment at 3 a.m., bouncing and shushing, wondering if this was my punishment, to finally have the child I'd longed for, but to face it all alone. But then came the smiles, the coos, the first time he grabbed my finger and held on tight. The way his whole face lit up when I entered the room. The sweet weight of him falling asleep on my chest. My mother came by daily, bringing casseroles and offering to watch him while I showered or napped. My father would take him for walks in the stroller, proudly showing off his grandson to neighbors. They never mentioned Drew or asked about James. They simply folded Elliot into their lives as if this was always how it was meant to be. I found a modest position cataloging the university's art collection, work that was quiet and anonymous compared to my curator role in Boston. The hours were flexible, the people kind, and no one asked personal questions beyond polite interest in my baby. My new colleagues knew me only as Nora, the single mom with the adorable little boy. They didn't know about the Blackwells or the fertility treatments or the affair that had produced Elliot. Here, I was just another working mother doing her best. Patricia had been right all along, though not in the way she'd meant. I wasn't infertile. The problem had never been my body, but something deeper, something broken in how Drew and I fit together biologically. The cruel irony was that it took betraying him to discover this truth. The biological mysteries that kept Drew and me from conceiving despite years of trying would likely never be solved. Maybe our specific combination of genetics was incompatible in ways science couldn't yet identify. Maybe stress and expectation had created physical barriers we couldn't overcome. Whatever the reason, the universe had denied us a child together while granting me one with a virtual stranger. Sometimes in the deep darkness of 3 a.m. feedings, I allowed myself to imagine an alternate reality, one where I had told Drew about the affair immediately, where we had somehow found a way through the pain together, where Elliot had the father figure he deserved. But those fantasies dissolved with the dawn, replaced by the stark reality of our separate lives. I watched Elliot grow from newborn to infant to curious baby, reaching milestones that I photographed and stored away in albums no one else would ever look through. His first smile, first laugh, first time rolling over all moments that should have been shared with a partner, a father, a family beyond just me. When Elliot was 3 months old, a thick cream envelope arrived, addressed in Patricia's unmistakable handwriting. Inside was a formal announcement. Drew had remarried, a quickie ceremony in the Cayman Islands. His bride was Vanessa Sinclair, daughter of Patricia's oldest friend. The announcement included a handwritten note. She's already pregnant. Due in July. A true Blackwell heir. I crumpled the announcement and threw it away, then retrieved it from the trash an hour later, smoothing its edges before placing it in a drawer. Someday, Elliot might want to know about the family he almost had, about the man who would have been his father in everything but blood if I had made different choices. Drew had moved on. Drew was happy. Drew would have the family he deserved, the family I couldn't give him, not because of biology, but because of betrayal. The knowledge should have brought me peace. Isn't that what we're supposed to want for those we've hurt? Their happiness, even if it excludes us? Instead, it felt like one final confirmation of my replaceability. Drew had simply slotted Vanessa into the life that was supposed to be mine, and everything had fallen into place the way it never had for us. As Elliot grew stronger, pulling himself up on furniture and babbling his first approximations of words, I tried to focus on the miracle I'd been given rather than the life I'd lost. This beautiful boy was mine, wholly mine in a way that nothing else in my life had ever been. If you've ever had to rebuild your entire life from scratch, give this video a like. Sometimes the path forward isn't about erasing the past, but finding purpose despite it. Patricia's final toast had come true, just not in the way anyone expected. I had indeed been unable to give Drew the family he deserved, not because my body failed, but because I did. As I rocked Elliot to sleep in our tiny apartment, watching the snow fall outside the window, I realized that some failures cannot be redeemed. Some mistakes change your story forever. The miracle growing inside me at that Thanksgiving table wasn't a happy ending, but the beginning of a different life entirely, one defined not by the family I lost, but by the child I must now raise alone. The cruelest twist was that I finally had what I wanted for so long, a child of my own, but at a cost higher than I ever imagined paying. A cost that continues to compound with each passing day, with each milestone Elliot reaches without a father to witness it, with each night I spend alone wondering what might have been. On Elliot's first birthday, I hosted a small party in my parents' backyard. Just family, my parents, my aunt, a couple of cousins who lived nearby. My mom made a cake shaped like a teddy bear. My dad built a tiny rocking horse as a gift. I watched Elliot toddle around the grass, smashing cake into his face, squealing with delight at the colorful balloons. A perfect day by all appearances. No one looking at us would know the complicated path that led to this moment. No one could see the phantom guests missing from the celebration: Drew, who should have been taking 1,000 photos, James, who didn't even know his son existed, the extended Blackwell family, who would never know this little boy with my eyes and someone else's smile. That night, after everyone left and Elliot was asleep in his crib, I sat alone on my tiny balcony with a glass of wine, scrolling through the day's photos. Happy moments captured for posterity, carefully curated to show only joy, only celebration. Not the emptiness that followed me everywhere, not the regret that woke me in the middle of the night. My phone pinged with a notification. A social media update from someone I used to know in Boston. A photo from a museum gala I would have attended in my old life. And there in the background, almost out of frame but unmistakable, Drew and a heavily pregnant woman I assumed was Vanessa. They looked happy, comfortable, right together in a way Drew and I had never quite managed even in our best moments. I switched off my phone and looked up at the stars instead. The same stars shining over Boston, over Drew and his new life, over James and his Italian wife and their baby who would never know about their American half-brother. Here's the truth no one tells you about consequences. They don't arrive all at once. They unfold over time, revealing themselves in quiet moments when you least expect them. In the way a stranger's child at the playground has your ex-husband's eyes. In the questions your toddler hasn't yet learned to ask about the father missing from his life. In the second guesses that haunt you at 3 a.m. I didn't lose just Drew when I betrayed our marriage. I lost a version of myself I had been building for years, the woman who believed in fidelity and honesty, who thought love could overcome any obstacle. I became someone else that night in Milan, and there's no going back to who I was before. When Elliot started preschool at age 3, one of the first projects they did was a family tree. He came home with a paper outline of a tree, branches ready for photos or drawings of family members. He asked about his dad that night, the first direct question he'd ever posed. I'd been preparing for this moment for years, but no rehearsed answer seemed adequate when facing those innocent, curious eyes. "Your dad lives far away," I told him finally. "Sometimes families are different." Some kids have a mom and dad who live together. Some have two moms or two dads. Some have just a mom like you. He accepted this with the simple logic of a 3-year-old. But I knew the questions would only get more complex, more pointed as he grew older. Someday I would have to tell him the full truth, not just that his father wasn't in our lives, but why. Someday I would have to watch my son's face as he learned that his very existence stemmed from my greatest moral failing. That's the burden I carry, not just the consequences of my actions for myself, but the knowledge that my choices created ripples that will affect Elliot for his entire life. No matter how good a mother I am, no matter how much love I give him, I cannot erase the fact that his origin story is tangled up in betrayal and secrecy. Patricia was right. Some women aren't meant to be mothers, not because their bodies fail them, but because their choices do. Yet here I am, mothering anyway. Loving this child with everything I have, determined to give him the best life possible despite the circumstances of his conception. Trying to be worthy of him, even knowing I failed at worthiness before. Elliot is 5 now. He starts kindergarten next month. He loves dinosaurs and building blocks and the color green. He has my laugh and James's dark curls and absolutely no idea how complicated his existence is. When he smiles, I see nothing but pure joy, untarnished by the messy adult choices that brought him into the world. Sometimes, that smile is enough to make me believe redemption is possible after all. Not the kind that erases the past or brings back what was lost, but the kind that creates something new and beautiful from the wreckage. The kind that acknowledges mistakes without being defined by them. I don't know if Drew has found happiness with Vanessa and their child. I hope so. I don't know if James ever thinks about his brief affair with an American curator, if he ever wonders about the consequences of those stolen nights in Boston hotel rooms. I doubt it. What I do know is this: in the midst of loss and regret, miracles can still happen. Not the perfect, storybook miracles we dream of, but the messy, complicated ones that come with conditions and consequences. Elliot is my miracle, born from my greatest mistake, but perfect in his own right. Every morning when he climbs into my bed for our morning cuddle, every time he looks at me with complete trust and love in his eyes, I make the same silent promise: I will be worthy of you. I will learn from my mistakes. I will show you that even when we fail spectacularly, we can find our way back to something good and true. It's not the life I planned. It's not the family I imagined during all those years of trying with Drew. But it's ours, mine and Elliot's, and somehow, despite everything, it's enough. If this story touched you in any way, please hit that subscribe button. We all make mistakes, but it's what we do afterward that defines us. Share in the comments a time when you had to rebuild after a mistake seemed to destroy everything. Your story might help someone else find their way forward. Life rarely follows the path we expect. One choice, one mistake, can alter everything we thought we knew about ourselves and our future. But even in our darkest moments, there's always a way forward, even if it's not the one we would have chosen. My name is Nora, and this is my story of betrayal, consequence, and the unexpected gift that came from my greatest regret. Thank you for listening, and remember, our worst choices don't have to be our final chapter. Hit that subscribe button for more real stories of redemption and reinvention. Until next time.